Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, Episode 134, The Fundamental Theory of the Calculus of Life, Part 2. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today I will discuss the fundamental theory of the calculus of life. This is Part 2 in a series. I have to film indoors today since it is humid outside. Today is Rosh Hashanah. So, what's on tap for today? Well, first I'll discuss some properties of the imaginary territories. Then I will discuss more recent information that I have discovered, so to speak, that I have analyzed regarding the fundamental theorem of the calculus of life. Then later on, more properties of the imaginary territories. And if we have time after all of that, we'll get into Swedenborg and Esoteric Islam by Corbin. So now, let's continue with properties of the imaginary territories. Anyway, so we have, as I said, we have the highway and a way of drawing people into the imaginary territories. But there's other properties too. Well, on the east side, we love to do things together. We always think of ourselves functioning in a group with several, if not many, people or imaginary territory beings or both working with us on any given moral quest. Even though it might seem impossible, somehow even people we don't know or interact with, perhaps they somehow affect us in all of this. And perhaps we affect them by having similar desires. So that's another property of the imaginary territories, is we could affect each other at a distance without even knowing it, just by having similar goals and attitudes. Sure, I believe in this quite strongly, and so that's why I typically think of myself not functioning alone in the imaginary territories or in any moral quest, but rather having lots of friends and agents working with me, kind of guardian angels of sorts. And I guess, well, the guardian angels like your attitudes, so they are drawn to them. So I guess your guardian angels may have similar attitudes that you have, or at least that's another theory of mine or property of the imaginary territories. Anyway, so this just goes on and on, now doesn't it? Oh, another property, I guess, is how legendary events, important events of the imaginary territories typically unfold. This would be an archetypical story. It would have most of these elements, if not all of them. First, you would start off with the person alone, feeling defeated in their quest, feeling no one shares your attitudes or morals, and feeling quite isolated, facing an upward moral battle where they have to convince someone who is opposed to their viewpoint. The job of convincing is going to be extremely difficult. The person they're trying to convince will surely laugh in their face, and they, being isolated and alone and being the only person who seems to have this attitude or moral, will pay the price for it. This is all unfortunate indeed. However, things are inverted here, And the person acting all alone actually has the correct moral and attitude. And they're living in a situation where everyone surrounding them has the wrong attitude. Well, the imaginary territories come to the rescue. And literally, almost out of thin air, people appear who have the similar attitude and moral that the lone hero or heroine does. Suddenly, they're not alone. Suddenly, they have lots of friends. And their friends not only are friends, but they do such a wonderful job. And with the individual almost leading them in a choreographed dance, similar to what they do in North Korea, filling up stadiums with dancers. Well, it's very much the same in the imaginary territories. As you do a dance, everybody in the imaginary territories instantly dances with you, trying to accomplish your goal. Then, suddenly, the hero or heroine fighting the uphill battle is no longer. And then suddenly, the people who think they're in such a majority with their attitudes and morals suddenly realize that they're all wrong. And even though they're in the majority, they're obviously all wrong. Because the lone individual who they thought was incorrect was able to instantly drum up all this support. And the support they drummed up clearly and logically and for certainty showed them that they were in error. And that would be a typical story of the imaginary territories. Gee, these properties are all very fascinating to me. Well, is there any substance to this? Am I alone with my thoughts? Well, perhaps not. As I soon shall see, and I guess you shall see in the next episode of the Casey Waters Show, I will discuss Swedenborg, who was a Sufi prophet and teacher from the 11th century. And Swedenborg was taught by Aristotle, and they influenced each other. Well, so this should all be very interesting indeed. Or, hold it, I might have that wrong. I thought Aristotle lived far before the 11th century. So perhaps Swedenborg was influenced by Aristotle instead of taught by Aristotle, since Aristotle would have been long dead. Anyway, so we'll find out in the future if Swedenborg and Swedenborg have similar notions to me about these imaginary territories. Otherwise, we surge on, for action is typically quick in the imaginary territories. We might have long periods of waiting, but then, sudden, quick action, as it all comes together in the name of God. Now, it is time for the fundamental theory of the calculus of life. Here I add newly discovered material, new material that I've analyzed, an equation or two I have derived. So, let's jump in to this new material that I have analyzed. Well, just to brush us up, the fundamental theory of the calculus of life has two parts. The first part, du, is considered the smallest thought that could be still considered a thought, that can still have any substance to it. You add up all these fragments of thought, you add up all these thoughts, and you come up with you, your whole self. Well, that is fine. But in addition to you, you have the arbitrary constant of individuality.